So when we're talking about economics, a big part of any economics, right, but especially macroeconomics, is the whole so what, right? So what? Why do we care? Well, we care about these indicators because we care about people's standard of living, right? We want to know how well off people are doing. Are they enjoying more goods and services over time? Are they enjoying greater health? Are they enjoying more free time, more leisure time, more vacation, so on and so forth, right? So this standard of living is a multifaceted thing that we can't actually get at with any one given indicator, right? But essentially we want a measure of how well off people are doing. And since we're talking economics, right, we're going to be talking about some dollar value of how well off people are doing. And so one of the main ways we look at standard of living internationally is by looking at what's called the gross national income. Now, the gross domestic product, right, we learned before, is the final value of all the goods and services produced in the United States, right? The gross national income is talking about how much income by the people that are living in that country, regardless of where that income is. So a Tesla store in Japan is going to add to US GNI because it's a US company. So even though it's making the sale in Japan, since it's a US company, that's going to increase our gross national income. So national has to do with who owns it. Domestic has to do with where is it physically located. And when we're talking about gross national income, right, we're almost always going to be talking about GNI per person or per capita. They mean the same thing, right? Capita is just our Latin word for person. And this is because different economies are going to be different sizes, right? The total GDP of China is much larger than the total GDP of the United States, but that doesn't mean that the standard of living on average, right, of Chinese people, Chinese citizens, is higher than the United States. Their gross national income per person is less than our gross national income per person because they have many more people than us, right? So when we're talking about gross national income, we have some kind of cutoffs, right? So if it is less than $1,085 per year, we're going to call this a low-income country. When it is between that 1,086 and 13,205, we call that middle income. And then I'll give you the politically correct version of these as well. Although these are kind of coming back around. They used to be, well, no, these are acceptable. The ones you can't use are third world. Third world. Third, second, and first world, no longer a thing. So we do low income, middle income, and then we do high income countries. So this is greater than 13,205. And then the other way that you'll see these discussed is low-income countries will be discussed as developing countries. Middle-income countries will be discussed as emerging economies. And then high-income countries will usually, they'll just be like high-income countries. They'll usually have a code of HIC. But the other way that you'll see this is since all of the high-income countries are all part of the OECD, you'll oftentimes just have OECD countries split off from developing countries and emerging economies. And before I say something that I don't remember, OECD is the Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development. International organization with 38 countries, founded in post-World War II to essentially stimulate economic progress and world trade, but also control it, right? As one does. So the reason why we are doing this is because, well, actually, this is better than GDP per capita, right? But it still has flaws. So there's no way it cannot capture the quality of people's life, right? When we look at other factors, can reveal wide differences in standard of living across the world. Other factors such as the health of people, the education opportunities and attainment that they have, the human rights. Can you say something on the internet without being thrown in jail, right? That's something that is a freedom that we very much take for granted here in the United States, right? But that's not the case in a fair number of countries. Crime and personal safety. You know, a wonderful booming economy is great, but if you are so scared to leave your house, and if, you know, your home is getting invaded and your car is getting broken into, and, you know, you're getting held hostage and stuff like that, right? And it's not a really good standard of life, you know, not a really great quality. And then lastly, right, this one comes into play in the extremes. So in the middle, people, again, take it for granted, but then when you're in like super beautiful places, right? Like if you live in Fort Collins, Colorado, or Boulder, Colorado, right? Like right on the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, it's gorgeous there. It's gorgeous. The winters are milder than here. Like the activities and everything like that is wonderful. The hiking and the trees and so on and so forth, right? And as a result, people will take a premium. They'll take a lower wage working in Boulder, Fort Collins, than doing that same job in some other city. So there's a element of kind of natural capital that is integrated into people's decision making when they're talking about future allocation decisions of their income, their money, their time, so on and so forth, right? And then the other extreme environmental quality becomes important is when your air is so toxic that you can't breathe it, when your water is, you know, non-potable, right? When you can't walk on the ground barefoot because there's so much trash and glass and stuff like that, right? Environmental quality, you know, takes a toll on your standard of living, even if you're a millionaire. Questions on these kind of other instances of quality of life? And we do have measurements for all these things, right? We can look at, you know, the average health. We can look at the average female mortality rate during childbirth, or the childbirth mortality rate, right? We can look at the number of the average education attainment, or the percentage of people that have a high school degree or a college degree, the percentage of women that have a high school or college degree, right? Which, you know, kind of dovetails both into the education and the human rights. Human rights is where it gets a lot more fuzzy, right? It's very difficult. Some things are very black and white, like, you know, your freedom of speech and whether you can say something critical of the government on the internet or not. But other things are, you know, start to get a little bit more in the weeds, right, in terms of human right variables and what people value as different human rights, right? You know, the different aisles of the U.S. political spectrum would probably have very different conclusions about which countries have better or worse human rights when they're slicing the top tier of countries. You know what I mean? I think they'd all be able to like agree that like these 50 have bad human rights, these 50, you know, this 50% have bad, this 50% have good. But then if you just look at the top 50%, I think there'd be a lot of disagreement because of the ideological differences that we have, right? That all countries have. Crime and personal safety, right? We can look at the crime rates. We can look at, you know, police funding. We can look at incarceration rates, at recidivism, right? The rate that people go back to prison or jail for a certain crime. And then environmental quality, right? We can look at parts per million of our air. We can look at purity of water, so on and so forth. Questions on our other factors of standard of living?